It's not a building, but a graveyard in an old abandoned coal town called Red Ash. This place is notoriously haunted, and there are multiple stories, sightings of apparitions, and paranormal activity in the area. There's multiple legends about a graveyard of child coal miners, a woman who cries over her grave every night, the spirits of coal miners walking along the train tracks, a witch's shack, and a demonic goat man, among other things. There's legit so many stories about this place, and if you ask anyone in my area, they'll tell you all about it. Most people actually avoid this area because of the stories, but mostly because it's on a back road with one-lane bridges and potholes. But not dumb teenager kids, and my friends and I just so happened to be those dumb teenagers. So one night, I was driving around with a couple of my friends, and we started talking about the place. My friend Alex and I have never been there, so my friend Brendan insisted we go right then. This place is like a 30-ish minute drive from where we all live, so my friend Alex and I went ahead and hopped in the car. So we drive all the way out into this deep neck of the woods in a tiny 2-door Mini Cooper with the intention of finding all the legends, starting with the graveyard. But we never got past the graveyard. We all got out of the car once we found the graveyard and started looking around for any signs of the paranormal. All of us were very jumpy because it's 2 a.m. and we keep hearing footsteps in the woods. The only adequate light we had was our phone flashlights. We tried to take our time, and I split off from our terrified group huddle to look around. Alex and Brendan are looking around one side of the graveyard, and I make my way to the other side. The graveyard was very small, and we were only about 20 feet from each other when we were roaming around. It was mostly us saying stuff like, "Have you found anything yet?" But then I noticed this set of 2 twin headstones that are very old, and the writing on them is weathered. They are particularly interesting because they were twin stones, probably a couple. They were about 1 foot high and 3 feet tall, both on one base, so these stones were close to 4 feet in height. Most of the stones were in-ground or very small headstones. As I said before, mostly the stones of children or the poor. I circled the base of the headstones, starting at the front. I come back around and begin to walk away when the left stone literally breaks in half and falls towards me. It hits the ground with a loud thump, which is what alerted me to the stone having fell. It was a horizontal break, but these stones had no cracks and I didn't touch the stones in the slightest. I jump, turn, and scream at the same time. Both Alex and Brendan scream. Alex whips around to see what happened while Brendan just guns it straight to the car. Brendan dives headfirst into the back seat from the passenger side. Alex jumps into the driver's side and I throw the front seat backwards and hop in while Brendan's legs are still hanging out of the door. We drive off with the passenger door still open and Brendan's legs were still hanging out. As we're driving, I pull my seat up so that Brendan can actually get into the car. We were all traumatized and very shook. But now we're filled with questions and gushing with adrenaline. So we do the stupid thing of turning around and going back to the graveyard to find that top half of the stone is completely missing now. There was maybe 10 minutes between us leaving and coming back, and in that time, the piece of the tombstone that broke off has completely disappeared. We decided we've had enough and left for the night. We went back a few times after that, and it's always spooky, but we've never had quite the encounter as our first visit. I actually plan to buy some cheap ghost hunting equipment and have those same friends go back out with me. In my old neighborhood, there was an old, burnt-out house with a ghost story attached to it. I heard it all the time growing up and never believed it, but I'll share that at the end. I joined a band as a young adult with a guy that claimed to be a medium. We had a number of discussions but never changed each other's minds. One day, we wanted to take pictures and we wanted it in an abandoned building, so I suggested the old house from my old neighborhood. I never told anyone in the band the ghost story, and my hometown was an hour from where we rehearsed, so we loaded up and went down to the old house. We got some great stuff on the first floor, then went upstairs. We're setting up in one room when the photographer asks, "Hey D, you good?" And just for some context, D was my friend that claimed to be a medium. D was really quiet, staring into space, and he had a crucifix out. He kept rubbing it between his fingers. D looks over and goes, "Guys, we need to leave." We ask him why, and he tells us in the coldest voice I've ever heard, "I'm communicating with a spirit right now, and she says we have to leave." I laughed and said, "Yeah, right. You're scared of some ghost girl?" D looks me dead in the eye and says, "It is a little girl, and she's not the one we need to worry about. It's the man in the back. He's coming." Every hair on my body stood up. I don't remember leaving the room or going downstairs. The next thing I knew, I was sitting on the grass 50 yards from the house, puffing on a cigarette like my life depended on it. You see, the ghost story is as follows. Back in the late 30s, the man that lived in that house was kidnapping and attacking young girls. He picked one particular little girl who fought back when he tried to force himself on her in the house. She fought him so hard that he stabbed her before going to his room to pass out. She wasn't dead yet and kicked over the oil lamp in the room. Both of them were killed in the fire. Luckily, after this, the rash of attacks on young girls in the town stopped. The limited forensics of the time period confirmed that the fire was in her room and she had stab wounds. Now her ghost and his inhabit the shell of the house. He is a bad spirit, and she is a good one, who has consigned herself to containing his presence. But when trespassers enter the room where he attacked his victims, he will be drawn to them. She will try to ward trespassers away, going so far as to manifest herself when people are especially stubborn. I told the guys the story, and ended up sitting down for lessons on the spiritual realm with D. Needless to say, I believe in ghosts now. I used to be heavily into urban exploration, primarily in Alaska and Arizona during my peak. In Arizona, there's a town called Two Guns that has been bought, sold, developed, and abandoned more than 20 times in the past 50 years. This has led to some local folklore about it being haunted. Now there's a section of Two Guns that is developed and is comprised of old derelict buildings, abandoned swimming pools, and all different kinds of half-constructed other buildings. Overall, there's nothing really spooky here. Then there's another area on the outskirts, which is what I found out later to be known as Apache Death Caves. They are twisting caverns that yawn up from the earth full of jagged edges. The scariest aspect is how suddenly they appear in the ground. If one was covered by even a thin layer of brush or a light dusting of snow that collected, it's easy to see how one would fall to their death without any forewarning. I approached one on my belly and took a few pictures with flash, exposing the interior, which to the naked eye just looks like a jet black pit that swallows up all the light. The appearance and risk of falling into them was not what haunted me about them though. It was the sound emitted from them, even in the absence of surrounding input. A hollow, deep-bellied, faint roar, or more like a moan, could be heard coming from the inside. It was as if the wind was sucked into its corridors and projected back out as the sound of 1,000 tremulous souls caught in the eternal horror of its bowels. The flash revealed a set of bones, and I was freaked out. I stood up as fast as I can and told my buddy we need to go. I later read that the Apache Indians would use these caverns as traps for horsemen during raids and attacks during the expanse across the West by colonist settlers. I cannot begin to imagine dying in such a way, surrounded by the pitch black and the sounds of the screams and the groans coming from the echoing cave. My exploration partner and I left at nightfall and never returned back there.